Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another fantastic Project Impact event. My name is Scott Oliver. I'm a current senior studying communication with a concentration in human relations. I will be attending the Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law in August. As you will hear more about shortly, we are an audience interactive forum, and we will provide specific instructions to ensure that you will all be involved throughout the night. Our special guest this evening will be introduced in a moment, but first I'd like to present to you our Director of Polling, Kyle Walker.
Thank you, Scott. As Scott mentioned, our forum tonight is extremely interactive, which means we want you to have your cell phone out. We want you to be on your tablet and tweet us questions, answer our poll questions. So before I tell you how to answer our poll, I want to explain that your answers are anonymous. Don't be afraid that we're going to take your phone number, your name, your social security number, or anything like that. We can't get any of that. So the phone number that you're going to be texting your answers to is up on the screen. It's 37607, or you can use your tablet to go to www.polev.com/Purdue Impact. So if you haven't already, take out your phone, and we're going to start. So the first question that's up on the screen is, what is your age? Go ahead and text your answer right now. For me, I'm going to put in PU01. Give it a couple more seconds. It seems like we have a pretty young crowd, which is expected from a university. Next question is going to be, where are you on the political spectrum?
Give them just a couple more seconds on this.
There you go. So where do you consider yourself on the political spectrum? Republican, Democrat, conservative but not Republican, liberal but not Democrat, or none of the above? We have a pretty diverse crowd right there. Let's move on to the next question. Oh. Can you go back briefly? Okay. So a pretty even split right there. Let's move on to the next question, please. So what is your primary source for political news? We have print newspaper, online but not newspaper, such as Twitter or Facebook, cable news, C-SPAN, all of the above or none of the above. And that's a pretty interesting trend right there. It pretty much mirrors what all the experts have been saying, that everyone is switching to online newspaper. It seems that print newspaper is holding in there, though. All right. So the issue most important to you is which one of these? Jobs in the economy, the environment, guns, energy, immigration, healthcare, education, or none of the above? It looks like almost everyone has responded. Yeah, the most important issue is clearly the economy. Moving on to the next question. Gridlock in Washington has affected my life. So gridlock being the two parties not being able to get anything done in Congress and the Senate. All right, moving forward. So what is bipartisanship? Is it the best route to effective government? One solution among others that makes government work? Does it rarely work? Or does it have no place in Washington? I want the people I elect to hold their ground. And it seems like everyone's in agreement that compromise is a pretty good thing. And it appears that everyone's answered the poll. Let's move on. Who is mostly at fault for the state of divided affairs in Washington? Is it Republicans in Congress, Democrats in Congress, the President and the White House, or the voters who sent elected officials to Washington? I'm looking forward to the results of this one. And this is pretty interesting. It seemed like we had a pretty solid split down the middle as far as political affiliations go. Let's move on to the next question. This is the last question. Who is most responsible for ensuring that compromise occurs? The President, the Speaker of the House, the Senate and House majority and minority leaders, the American people, or compromise isn't necessary? Well, it seems like you guys are pretty much in agreement that it's the Senate and House majority and minority leaders. Make sure that you guys are writing to your senators and congressmen. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa.
Thank you, Graham. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Lisa Abrego, and I am a senior in political science and public relations. Tonight, we would like to encourage audience questions, which you can do in two different ways. First off, there will be a microphone right here in the middle, and there is also a microphone in the back. I would now like to encourage Ari to introduce himself, all the way back there.
Hi, I'm Ari Swartz. I'm a senior in public relations from Charlestown, Indiana. And if you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll come to you.
And then the second method of asking questions tonight will be through Twitter. You can do this by directing your questions at @project_impact. I would now like to encourage our moderators, Alicia and Anil, to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Alicia Yadav. I'm a senior in anthropology from San Jose, California, and a Project Impact student.
My name is Anil Rao. I'm a senior in industrial engineering from West Windsor, New Jersey, and I'm also a Project Impact student.
Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce Dr. Doug Hurt, a noted scholar of the Dust Bowl and head of the Department of History. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Lisa. It's indeed my honor this evening to introduce a distinguished scholar whom many of you know. He's visited Purdue before, and I know I speak for many when I say we're delighted to have him back. Richard Norton Smith is certainly a well-trained scholar, graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University in government, but it's really his record as a historian, as a superb writer of biography that I think catches our eye and for which we most know him. And I'm really amazed and in many ways astounded by his ability to conduct research and write in such a comprehensive and fluid way. His distinguished biographies of Thomas Dewey and his Times, who is a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, as many of you know. His biography, An Uncommon Man, The Triumph of Herbert Hoover, is really a superb study of a sometimes not well-remembered president. His biography, Patriarch George Washington and the New American Nation, was a History Book Club selection. And The Colonel, The Life and Legend of Robert R. McCormick, received the Goldsmith Prize by Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School. And he is currently in the process, nearly completing a biography of Nelson Rockefeller. So I know if you are like me and you like to read 20th century biography, you know Richard Norton Smith's works and have enjoyed them for a long time. I must tell you, though, that he certainly had a very distinguished career in public service as the director of the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library, the director of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Center, the director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, director of the Gerald R. Ford Museum and Library, and founding director of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. And currently he is a scholar in residence at George Mason University, where he teaches courses on the American presidency. All of this is, to me, distinguished enough and quite impressive. But I must tell you, the thing that really impresses me most about Richard Norton Smith, and he doesn't know this because I've been talking to him about it, but a couple of months ago when we were all caught up in the presidential campaign, I saw him on one of the cable news panels. I don't know, it was CNN or something, and I don't know, Soledad O'Brien or someone asked him as a historian what all of this meant about tomorrow or the future. And without blinking, he said, essentially, in a very polite way, he really had no idea, because it was the historian's job to assess the past rather than predict the future. And everyone on that panel looked at him in a very bewildered fashion. And I wondered if they actually paid him for serving on the panel that night, since they clearly didn't get, my guess is, what they had hoped for. But I thought this reflected a remarkable integrity on the part of a scholar who has certainly plied his trade in the archives and spent a lot of time thinking and writing, and I very much admire him for that position. It is indeed our pleasure this evening to have Richard Norton Smith with us, who will speak on our divided democracy, how we became so polarized. Richard Norton Smith.
Thank you, Doug. No, they didn't get the answer they expected, and I've never been invited back. So I guess that answers your question. Thank you. That was a very kind introduction. But I have learned that is characteristic of the way things operate here at Purdue. It's a real delight for me to come back here. I'm a great fan of Carolyn and her work and Project Impact, and it was no accident that I was able to arrange my visit just 2 days before sequestration takes place in Washington. And someone asked me this afternoon, sort of like that question in CNN, do you have an answer for a solution for sequestration? And the simplest answer is to send the Project Impact students to Washington in place of the people who are there now. And I think we might get a lot of things done. I also find myself back in Tippecanoe County, which of course brings up the late lamented William Henry Harrison. The only president, I say, who ever died from talking too much. Memorably, on his inauguration day in 1841, in the midst of a sleet storm, he decided to display his erudition at great length, almost 2 hours, subsequently contracted pneumonia and died. No master of the soundbite, but he has, it seems to me, imparted an object lesson to speakers everywhere, certainly to this one. So anyway, thank you, General Harrison. No doubt everyone here has their own definition of the word polarization. That term synonymous with gridlock and mindless partisanship. To me, it's a euphemism for dysfunctional democracy, one awash in corporate money and influence, debased by soundbite politics, gotcha journalism, and a stubborn refusal on the part of most elected officials to act seriously, even when confronted by a host of serious challenges. I should warn you up front, I am not a political scientist, nor a policy maker, nor a pundit, although I occasionally play one on TV. It's fair to say I'm a man without a party. I believe that spin is something best relegated to the wash cycle, and that alone guarantees you will never see me on Fox and Friends or The Ed Show. Neither am I a prognosticator. In fact, I really do. I think I have enough trouble trying to make sense out of the past without predicting the future. And while I have no objection to discussing contemporary issues, on the contrary, my overriding interest is in trying to understand how we got to this point. Granted, history isn't supposed to repeat itself, even if occasionally historians do. But I wonder, has there ever been a time when our politics were more savage or superficial? On the other hand, are there historical parallels that might give us ground for optimism? Let me also challenge what I just said, conventional wisdom to some degree, by suggesting that polarization per se is not the greatest threat facing democratic government. Indeed, polarization has been with us for much, if not most, of American history. In a democracy, differences, so long as they are constructively pursued, are a sign of health. Only indifference is lethal. And yet that is the condition afflicting ever greater numbers of our fellow citizens for whom politics appear at once pointless and irrelevant. An election campaign, for example, it's a conversation we have with ourselves. And yet last year it often seemed as if many Americans were barely on speaking terms. As substantive debate degenerates into focus group talking points, our politics have become increasingly mired in the trivial, the tactical, and the tawdry. Under the circumstances, should it come as any surprise that millions of us have tuned out the conversation altogether? Today, Americans of both parties and of no party feel isolated from the political process and alienated from one another. Some are Tea Partiers, some occupiers, many more wear no label at all. This much, however, they have in common. They wonder if their vote counts, if their voices are heard. As citizens of a republic, we Americans have always defined government as self-government. Democracy, we hold, succeeds to the extent that it is organized from the ground up, not dictated from the top down. Which brings us to what I call the paradox of polarization. Consider the 4 granite faces on Mount Rushmore, each revered universally as an American icon, right? Think again. Quote, if ever a nation was debauched by a man, the American nation has been debauched by Washington. If ever a nation was deceived by a man, the American nation has been deceived by Washington. That's how the Philadelphia Aurora, the Washington Post of its day, described George Washington's legacy in the twilight of his presidency. Forget the sugary tributes after the fact to Washington as one who unites all hearts. Long before he became a monument, chilly and featureless, Washington labored to unify a nation in name only, one whose divisions dwarf our own, and whose partisan press anticipated today's most savage blogs. For his efforts, he was denounced as a dupe of King George. Mobs assembled outside his house in Philadelphia demanding that he pay for his betrayal of the revolution. Equally scorching were predictions made by Thomas Jefferson's opponents should the American electorate in 1800 be so misguided as to award the presidency to this free-thinking, French-speaking, macaroni-serving infidel of Monticello. Declared one Connecticut journal, quote, unrestrained by law or the fear of punishment, neighbors will become enemies of neighbors, brothers of brothers, fathers of their sons, and sons of their fathers. Murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The air will be rent with the cries of distress, the soil soaked with blood, the nation black with crimes. As objective political analysis, this is on a par with today's shrillest character assassins on talk radio or the web. It led Jefferson himself to declare the most trustworthy part of the daily newspaper to be the advertisements. No American leader was more divisive than our 16th president, whose election in 1860 led to the breakup of the Union itself. Quote, Mr. Lincoln will go down to posterity as the man who could not read the signs of the time, who plunged his country into a great war without a plan, who failed without excuse, who fell without a friend. So declared the august London Times in the autumn of 1864. Harsher still were the criticisms directed his way by Lincoln's war-weary countrymen. Much of this comes as a surprise to modern-day Americans, many of whom assume that Lincoln was born on Mount Rushmore. How, they ask, could this most polarizing of presidents become over time the president against whom all others are measured? And then there is Theodore Roosevelt, under whose egocentric leadership the administrative presidency of the 19th century became a position of unparalleled civic education and executive assertiveness. A master of the grand gesture, the man dubbed Theodore Rex was not notably self-effacing. Henry Adams, son and grandson of American presidents, said of TR that he was never sober, quote, only he is drunk with himself and not with rum. Indeed, it was claimed only half in jest that in reproducing the president's first message to Congress, the government printing office exhausted its supply of the personal pronoun. TR had an opinion on everything and a child's delight in sharing it. So he lectured his fellow citizens on the virtues of phonetic spelling and the pernicious theories of race suicide espoused by advocates of birth control. He denounced George Bernard Shaw as a blue-rumped ape and revolutionary polemicist Thomas Paine as a filthy little atheist. Domestic critics of the Roosevelt administration were flailed as circumcised skunks and copper-riveted idiots, while pacifists were contemptuously dismissed as flubdubs and mollycoddles. Ironically, TR, the polarizer, entertained his own fears regarding political polarization. Listen to this, almost exactly 100 years ago, from the pen of Theodore Roosevelt. It would be a dreadful calamity, he wrote, if we saw this country divided into two parties, one containing the bulk of the property owners and conservative people, the other the bulk of the wage earners and the less prosperous people generally. Each party insisting upon demanding much that was wrong, each party sullen and angered by real and fancied grievances. His distant cousin Franklin took a rather different view as he battled the economic royalists in whose hatred he gloated, well aware that on election day, the ranks of the forgotten man far outnumbered the discredited titans of finance. FDR's example reminds us that agents of change are inevitably polarizing figures. Woodrow Wilson famously said, if you want to make an enemy in Washington, try to change something. Certainly, we judge our presidents by the enemies they make and the evils, real or imagined, that they prosecute. I was born for a storm, said Andrew Jackson, and a calm does not suit me. True to his word in the White House, Jackson made war on the Bank of the United States and threatened the same to his native South Carolina should she make good on her vow to nullify a despised federal tariff. The result was the age of Jackson, and an example of presidential leadership that Lincoln would cite to justify his own war policies. Grover Cleveland is not thought of as a particularly heroic figure. He did constant battle, however, with the United States Senate over excessive spending, veterans benefits, and tariff reform. The story is told one night that the president's wife, Frances, was awakened by sounds in the old house, and she in turn wakened the president. She said, there are thieves in the house. And Cleveland groggily turned over and said, no, my dear, thieves in the Senate, not in the House. Woodrow Wilson destroyed his health in a futile campaign to bring the United States Senate to heel in the matter of the League of Nations. And we're still debating, was that in fact a heroic action on Wilson's part? Was it an avoidable action? Had Wilson resigned after his stroke? Would his historical reputation be higher today? Might, on a wave of sympathy, the Senate have adopted the League of Nations? Might his successor have accepted the League with reservations, which Wilson found unacceptable? Was there ever a more polarized American electorate than in the spring of 1951, when Harry Truman fired the larger-than-life Douglas MacArthur? In Truman's words, quote, "because he wouldn't respect the authority of the president." I didn't fire him, Truman was quick to add, because he was a dumb son of a bitch, although he was. Yet not even Truman suffered an overnight drop of 22 points in his approval ratings, the fate visited on Gerald Ford when he pardoned Richard Nixon in September 1974. 4 decades later, we take a different view of Ford's action, just as we admire Harry Truman for his willingness to court short-term unpopularity in defense of civilian rule over the military. The 1950s are often thought of as a time of political and social cohesion. Nothing polarizing about that, notwithstanding Joe McCarthy, Sputnik, and the Rosenbergs. Yet even then, the seeds of future conflict were germinating, often out of sight, in Southern classrooms and countless American kitchens and living rooms where women struggled to redefine their place somewhere between tradition and trailblazing. For a time, it seemed as if the old reliables of American politics, above all, the divisions over government's role in the economy and America's role in the world, had been adjourned, if not finally adjudicated. Which brings us to 1960. What I would suggest is held by many people, and not just out of nostalgia, as the model election of our time. In fact, we now know it was an absolute aberration. It was the last consensus election in over 60 years. What do I mean by that? Well, they all spoke the same language. They shared the same experiences. They shared the same fears. A host of would-be presidents, not only JFK and Richard Nixon, but LBJ and Hubert Humphrey and Stuart Symington and Adlai Stevenson and Nelson Rockefeller, each in his varying experience, each was the product of a shared history, each shaped by the Great Depression and World War II, each stamped permanently, it seemed, by the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt and the revolution in public attitudes toward government that it generated. And each, likewise, embraced a national security state born of Cold War anxieties, one in which 9 presidents and 20 Congresses of both parties would maintain a sentinel's watch as humanity clung to the narrow window ledge of nuclear annihilation. The Kennedy-Nixon race emphasized differences of style precisely because differences of substance were almost non-existent. That's not all that set them apart from us. To begin with, there were the parties themselves. Traditionally, I would suggest, the great strength of the American political system lies in 2 strong parties, which between them enlist the energies and channel the passions of most of our citizens. On the surface, you might expect this to be a recipe for polarization. Yet historically, American parties have been instruments of government more than vehicles of protest. First, they define our differences, and then they mediate them. In doing so, they serve as a kind of ideological shock absorber, cushioning the impact of change and forging policies acceptable to the vast majority of Americans who travel in the middle of the road. In the 1960s, each party bore no resemblance to today's party. Each party, quite simply, was a hybrid of liberal and conservative. Even as the once solidly Democratic South began to shed its traditional loyalties, the GOP provided a home for Jacob Javits and Strom Thurmond. The Democrats were just as ideologically diverse, with Teddy Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey championing New Deal, lunch bucket liberalism against the John Stennises and Harry Byrds of the right. Now, one man's stability is another man's gridlock. In the wake of the Kennedy assassination, the great political scientist and Roosevelt biographer James McGregor Burns wrote a book called The Deadlock of Democracy. In it, he protested the sluggish political culture that had stymied much of Kennedy's legislative program. Those criticisms are very familiar to us today. Indeed, no doubt, many of us have made them. Burns, in his criticism, was being faithful to his hero because, in fact, it was FDR in the last months of his life who fantasized about realigning the political parties into a truly liberal party and a truly conservative party. A generation later, Barry Goldwater, occupying another point on the political spectrum, nevertheless generated much of the same hope. There's a wonderful story the weekend before the 1960 election. Goldwater called up Norton, who was then the Republican national chairman, said, excuse me, that Nixon shouldn't waste his time in the industrial East, and he certainly shouldn't waste his time in New York. Going into the election, he should be in Illinois, he should be in Texas. And Goldwater picked up from there with classic Goldwater bluntness, that he really wished that we could win this election without New York, because then we could tell New York to go to hell and kiss our ass and start a really conservative party. Well, you know, that's pretty much exactly what Barry Goldwater went on to do. That's when polarization, if you want to look in the modern context, really took root. But FDR and Barry Goldwater were not alone. Over the years, millions of Americans, I suspect a number of people in this room, have longed for a logical, ideological division of parties along unmistakable lines of left versus right. I am tempted to say, congratulations, you got your wish. I hope you're happy with the result. I would go further and suggest that it is the disappearance of the older party model, the working coalition of interests as well as ideologies, that has done more than anything else to foster our current polarized democracy. But let's be honest, the main reason we disagree is because we disagree. Millions of people have honest differences, for example, over the role of government. To millions of us, the life jacket of one generation has become the straitjacket of the next. They look upon government as too costly, too remote, and too unresponsive to be truly democratic. And it's not just on the right. Quite frankly, there are millions on the left who question the competence of government in the wake of Katrina. Many on the left believe, and moreover, that we were lied into a war in Iraq. So when you talk about basic, visceral, emotional, and intellectual distrust of government's competence, it is not the exclusive possession of the right or the left. Nothing so reflects us as our popular culture, and nothing so reflects our public discourse. If it seems less civil than a generation ago, anyone who watched the Oscars on Sunday night know what I'm referring to, chalk it up to a general coarsening of our society. The politicians didn't begin that. They reflect it. Today, next to shark attacks and a celebrity divorce, notoriety is the surest ticket to 15 minutes in the 24/7 news cycle and a corresponding spike in campaign contributions. These are hardly the only differences between then and now. Very quickly, let me just sum up a couple others. Basically, our attitudes toward authority. Today, long after Vietnam and Watergate, the unsolved energy crisis, undeclared wars, and unregulated Wall Street combine to undermine our faith in leaders of both parties, it is widely held that because there are many things government does badly, there is nothing it can do well. Trust in government. When John F. Kennedy stumbled into the Bay of Pigs disaster in April 1961, his poll ratings went up to 81%. 81% approval from 73% before the Bay of Pigs fiasco. In fact, Kennedy saw the humor in it. He said, "My God, it's just like Eisenhower. The worse I do, the more popular I become." Parties are out of favor with Americans. To most Americans, most of the time, they appear as little more than conduits for huge amounts of special interest money. Politicians today raise more money and enjoy less respect than at any time in recent memory. The bully pulpit is diminished. In 1971, Richard Nixon or his White House could call three men in three towers in New York at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and be assured that there'd be 70 million people a few hours later listening to whatever the president had to say. And when it was over, poor Eric Sevareid would be trotted out to offer instant analysis. Today, the president, if he sets foot in the bully pulpit, barely gets into his sermon before the electronic choir is already tweeting its version of instant analysis. There's no guarantee that any of those three networks will cover his speech. So the tools of presidential persuasion have been significantly diminished. The media climate itself, I'm not suggesting we turn the clock back and try to resurrect the fairness doctrine, but I do think there is no doubt that a large factor in our polarization stems from the whole phenomenon of journalism as entertainment, wherein opinion replaces fact, sensation crowds out names, nuance, and words are used to inflame rather than inform. Television has eroded attention spans and reduced political coverage to racetrack handicapping and the latest plot twist in the 24/7 news cycle. And you know when it all began? I'd say about 1975, when a program went on the air called Saturday Night Live. And it had great fun showing President Ford tripping over himself and stumbling downstairs and generally being a klutz. And it was funny, and the president himself went on the show, so he could hardly complain. But it is indicative of a shift in attitudes toward the presidency. One more irony, and that is, for all of the divisions, for all of the intense disagreements that exist in this country, there are fewer competitive districts in Congress than at any time in memory. If some people always say, if you could take a magic wand and do something to fix the current situation, what's the first thing you would do? The first thing I would do is take redistricting away from the parties. Give it to the judges, give it to a computer. Hell, give it to Project Impact. Give it to a group of fourth graders. They would do a fairer, more intelligent, more sensitive job than the political parties. And what would that mean? It would mean all of a sudden competitive districts. And when you have competitive districts, that means primaries no longer exclusively attract the most intense believers, right and left. It means that moderate voters would be drawn back into the process. It means that we wouldn't be in a situation 2 days ahead of sequestration where neither side is willing to talk to the other, lest they give offense to their base. One last point, and then we'll open it up to questions. I mentioned President Ford. I had the great privilege of getting to know him in his later years, and I heard him talk about the 1960s when he was a minority leader. Anyone who remembers the 60s, there was not exactly an era of good feeling. And yet, people managed to work together. The classic example, in 1964, the passage of the landmark Civil Rights Bill. In 1965, followed up with the Voting Rights Act. People forget, but in 1968, when nothing constructive presumably got done, Congress was able to pass open housing legislation. Every week, Gerald Ford and Everett Dirksen appeared in what was known as the Ev and Jerry Show on Capitol Hill. Ford played straight man to Senator Dirksen. It was Senator Dirksen who said, "I'm a man of fixed and unbending principles, and one of my principles is flexibility." Well, you know, Dirksen understood that it was another Republican from Illinois by the name of Abraham Lincoln who had given his party its moral charter as a party dedicated to human rights. Rarely has the two-party system risen to the occasion so nobly, if belatedly. Ford, Dirksen, Lyndon Johnson, the list goes on. Those folks understood something that we seem to have forgotten, and that is that there is a difference between campaigning and governing. That the permanent campaign stops on January 20th, and then guess what? Everyone takes responsibility for governing. That's why we had the campaign. That's why they were sent to Washington. And that's why they call it the loyal opposition. A closing quote. Talk about bipartisan. It was mentioned I was the first director at the Lincoln Library in Springfield, Illinois. Lincoln spent much of his life as a very partisan figure. He outgrew that long before he came to the White House, and certainly the experience of the Civil War turned him into something, both an incredibly shrewd politician and someone who was in many ways above politics. In any event, bipartisanship has a unique meaning in Illinois. For example, while at the Lincoln Library, had a lot of contact with the last two governors of the state, one Republican and one Democrat, both of whom are in jail. And indeed, the trick to succeed in Illinois is to get out before the indictments. A closing quote from a hero, perhaps to some people in this room too, and to those of you who have never heard him, I'm glad to introduce you to him. Another Illinois governor by the name of Adlai Stevenson, who, among other things, assured us, in his words, principled partisanship is the lifeblood of American democracy. Emphasis on principled. But that's not all he said. Listen to Governor Stevenson half a century ago. Politicians often speak of giving the people good government. But one can't really give good government to the people. Good government is not a gift. It is an achievement. It is a price. The price that must be paid in time and energy and mental sweat in order to understand and to inform others of our problems. The price of examining all sides of public issues. The price of subordinating your own immediate interest to the long-range welfare of the whole people. That's the price of good government. But the price of poor government is infinitely higher. Amen. Thank you very much. Questions?
Let's go to Twitter first.
Our first Twitter question comes from Dennis Saviano, the Dean of the Honors College, and he asks, how much has gerrymandering reduced the interest in politics by the average American?
Well, I touched upon that a little bit. I think it's been lethal. I think it's not only reduced the interest of the average American, I think it's significantly reduced the legitimacy of the result. I think gerrymandering is nothing new. Now, of course, we have computers and other devices to perfect the technique. But what has happened is there are probably, in any given year, 24 competitive districts out of 435, and you know that's not representative. A House of Representatives that ceases to be representative, it seems to me, is in real danger. The parties, frankly, in collusion with one another, have created a system where preserving the status quo is more important than addressing fundamental and soon to be overwhelming, it seems to me, challenges. You really sort of wonder why anyone wants to go to Washington. What's the point if you're not going to address serious issues? You know, if you want a title, fine. There are lots of titles. Anyway, unfortunately, it's easy to be cynical about the political process. Gerrymandering is, in my opinion, a cancer on the system. And cancers can be cured or cut out. But I don't think you can accept cancer as part of the status quo.
Just as a reminder, if you want to raise your hand, Ari in the back will come to you with a moving microphone.
Or come up here.
Or you can always come up to the front.
I have a question in the back.
Yeah.
I know in 1964 you mentioned that the parties were more unified because of the Civil Rights Act. Do you foresee any events in our near future that would unify the two parties currently?
That's a great question. Again, I'm loath to get into the predicting business, but let's just look at recent history. You would have thought 9/11 would do a pretty good job of not only encouraging the parties to find common ground, but quite frankly, encourage the rest of us to get serious about the political process. And for a few months, it did. And I hate to put it in these stark terms, but one is, it's difficult not to respond to that question by saying, if 9/11 couldn't make us get real, what is it going to take? I don't think sequestration is the answer to that question. It really is remarkable when, and again, I don't know where any of your politics are, but the remarkable thing is how much we agree on. Whether you're right, left, whatever, most people in this room, I'll bet, agree that we confront serious, systemic, economic and other challenges. Some domestic, others from hackers in Shanghai, you know, and the list goes on. We know that we have these problems. You can go to the next step, and actually, most people agree on the broad outlines of acceptable solutions. But it's not filtering down to our elected representatives. And my hunch is that it will take an election or two where someone pays, one side or the other, pays a significant price. Because right now, it's frozen. And I don't know how you unfreeze it.
Thank you very much for your presentation today. And I'm curious to hear your opinion on open primaries as an answer to extremism in political primaries.
Hey, it's an idea I think worth trying. The notion, tell everyone what an open primary is.
So an open primary would be a first past the post or forced to pass the post primary system where you don't register for a particular party, you vote for whoever you would like, and then the two or however many are elected or decided upon, two highest vote getters are those who go on to represent that district in the general election. And California has, as is often the case, being out in front of the rest of the country, has adopted this system. And again, it's much too early to decide. It did not make huge differences. And in fact, it pitted some pretty respected members of Congress against one another. But, let's give the experiment a chance. And again, I think it's an experiment worth trying. Let me give you one example of, because I don't want to sound, Scott, I don't want to sound as pessimistic as I'm afraid I do. I'll give you an example. Exactly 100 years ago, at the time of the Progressive Era, when folks who felt that the inequities in a nation rapidly growing, hugely prosperous, but decreasingly they felt democratic, where competition was less the norm, and centralization and even monopoly had really begun to characterize our economy. And likewise, people felt that the political process was frozen. For example, so any number of reforms were undertaken in some states, the referendum, the recall, and the like, votes for women. The hardest of all, for reasons that I don't have to explain, went to the heart, they thought, at the time of the problem, much as I just talked about gerrymandering, and that was the United States Senate. The United States Senate had bedeviled presidents for 50 years. The Senate, of course, was not popularly elected. The Senate was purchased by corporate interests. So you weren't the senator from Washington, you were the senator from Boeing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And people felt that it was increasingly unreflective of the nation. And so an effort was launched at the grassroots to amend the Constitution, to elect United States senators by a popular vote, just as members of the House are. Well, unsurprisingly, I don't think it will surprise you, the Senate was reluctant to vote that out, to let the states have an opportunity to pass judgment on such a radical idea. And you know what it took? I mean, there was this knockdown, drag-out battle. It took the following. It took a serious national grassroots effort to call a new constitutional convention, which got within one state of what was needed for there to be a new constitutional convention. And then the Senate blinked. And they voted, they coughed up this proposed amendment, which was quickly ratified by the necessary states, and henceforth, United States senators. Now, there are those who think maybe we made a mistake, but that's for others to argue. But the fact is, it took that radical, if you will, a measure for the preservers of the status quo to be sufficiently terrified to give way. But it happened.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for your presentation, and I wonder if you have any remarks to make about polarization at the Supreme Court. Thank you.
Not really. I'm not an authority on the Supreme Court, and I've often thought, you know, if more people on TV, when asked to comment on something they knew nothing about, said, I don't know anything about that, we'd all be better off. So I think maybe I'll leave it at that. There have been times, there have certainly been times when the polarization's been much greater. Right now, for example, one of the remarkable things, it's a 5-4 court. There's no doubt about that. But it's a civil 5-4 court. If you go back to the 20s and 30s, and the 9 old men, so-called, that FDR tried to replace packing the court, the interesting thing is they were mostly conservatives, some far right, and they hated each other more than they hated the liberals. I mean, there were some really evil characters on the court. I mean, there were openly anti-Semitic justices. There were justices who wouldn't talk to Justice Brandeis because he happened to be Jewish. You know, there are stories of justices who would turn their chair to the wall rather than acknowledge the presence of someone they took a dislike to. So it was not a very functioning court. And as I say, I think that's different. You know, one easy prediction, it will be fascinating. If you think the last election was heated, wait until the next vacancy occurs on the United States Supreme Court. It doesn't matter whether it's a liberal or a conservative. If it's a liberal, say Justice Ginsburg, or Justice Breyer were to decide to retire, there'd be a huge fight. And likewise, if one of the conservatives decided to go, because literally we are that close to solidifying a majority one way or the other, you know, on the court. Right now, you have basically 4-4 with Justice Kennedy, who's a conservative, but, you know, an unpredictable conservative. God, if Justice Kennedy were to leave, you know, let's just say you'd be seeing a lot of ads. If you thought you saw a lot of ads last fall, you know, for would-be senators and other candidates, that's just a warm-up.
We'll take one last.
Yep.
This question comes from Chad Barker. Does the predominance of social issues exacerbate partisan inefficiency?
Well, I wouldn't call it inefficiency. I mean, I think certainly, because I don't mean to dismiss for a moment strongly held views. I mean, I don't think it's inefficient. It may have inefficient outcomes depending on what you desire to be the result. That's a great question, and it's a good point to end on, because there is a huge qualitative difference. And indeed, it does go to the heart of what's different about this polarization. If you look at our history, if you look at the 1930s, FDR was a polarizing figure because of the profound changes that the New Deal represented, the role of government in the economy, the crashing of the icons from the 20s, the heroic bankers and financiers, you know, whose reputations were shattering, and all of that. And for most, not all, most of the 20th century, American politics and the fault lines in American politics revolved around basic economic issues and the role of government in the economy. Those are divisive, but they're nowhere near as divisive as social issues, as abortion or same-sex marriage, to name the two most obvious. Why? Because people may feel passionate about their money, but it's a different kind of passion. To
to people arguing social issues, these are moral convictions that are at stake. This is what they pray about when they go to church. These are core values. And it's not surprising that people defending core values, what they believe to be the essence of civilization itself, are going to be more intense, more fervent, perhaps more outspoken, fill in the blank, than people who are debating the minimum wage, or whether this program should be administered from Washington or as a block grant to the states. I think that's a significant factor contributing to what feels different about this polarization. The other thing, very quickly, and then I'll finish. As I've indicated, much of our history we've been polarized. And it has not by any means been destructive. There's such a thing as creative tension. There's a reason those four faces are up on Mount Rushmore, even though each in his own way, in his own time, was a polarizing figure. What's different now is, because of the omnipresence of cable TV and talk radio and the internet, it feels inescapable. It feels that we are immersed, submerged in this culture of ferocious, principled, and frankly often trivialized disagreement. I think people would say it's one thing, for example, to polarize a nation over the League of Nations, whether this country is going to cede X amount of its sovereignty to a world body. I mean, those are big questions. I think a lot of people have the feeling that the polarization today, much of what is dividing us, is manufactured. They're wedge issues, or they're part of a cynical attempt by many in the media to stoke controversies because it attracts eyeballs and increases, listenership. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. You can actually stay right up here. About to do the same thing. Hi there, everyone. I'm Allison Tucker, a sophomore from Warsaw, Indiana, studying corporate communication and Spanish. On behalf of Ambassador Carolyn Curiel and all the members in Project Impact, I would like to say thank you for attending this forum with our guest, renowned historian Richard Norton Smith. We invite everyone to attend a reception following right outside. It'll be right outside of Loeb Hall, kind of around the corner that direction. Light refreshments and beverages will be served. Also, Richard Norton Smith's book, The Colonel, The Life and Legend of Robert R. McCormick, will be on sale in the reception area as well. Further, we would like to thank you, Richard Norton Smith, for all your gracious time and knowledge this evening. Your insight has been truly invaluable and your humor unforgettable. We would like to also invite Dr. Hurt back up onto stage to thank him as well. We sincerely appreciate your work for this evening, Dr. Hurt. Derek Sanders, a senior studying political science from Goshen, Indiana, and Min-jae Kim, a freshman from South Korea, would like to give you both small tokens of our appreciation. We cannot thank you both enough for your time and consideration this evening. It's been truly wonderful. I would like to extend an invitation to everyone to attend our upcoming forums in April as well. On April 4th at 6 p.m. here in Fowler, we are very excited to be hosting best-selling author Anne Marie
Marie O'Connor, as she will be discussing her riveting story of one of the greatest art thefts in history, The Lady in Gold, the extraordinary tale of Gustav Klimt's masterpiece, Portrait of Adele Blocher-Bauer. Then a week later, on April 11th in Lawson Room 1142, we are honored to have our very own alumni, Brian Lamb, Executive Chairman and CEO of C-SPAN, return for another edition of the popular Masterclass. All invited to come early and chat with Brian Lamb over coffee and rolls. For more information, there are students in the back who will be handing out flyers as you exit and will be willing to answer questions about future events or how to join Project Impact. We hope you all come to those upcoming forums. That is all for this evening. Let's have a final applause for our wonderful guests. Thank you again.
Thanks.
If you're a Project Impact student, please make your way to the stage for a picture promptly.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, you bet. Thanks a lot.
I enjoyed your presentation as always. That was great fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank you.
again.
I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, good to see you later.
You bet.
Thank you.